Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 551 of the Juicebox Podcast. Do you guys like this opening, or should I go to something else? Friends, hello. Hello, people. Yo, what's up? It's Scott. No, let's stick with what we got, I guess. On today's show, Melanie is here. Melanie has a husband with type 1 diabetes and a child with type 1 diabetes, and we are going to talk all about it. Please remember while you're listening that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making any changes to your healthcare plan or becoming bold with insulin. There's a little bit of music left here, so I want to remind you that there is a private Facebook page for the podcast. It's called Juicebox Podcast Type 1 Diabetes. It's private so that you can go in there and chat with people about life with type 1 diabetes without prying eyes. There are over 15,000 members right now, and it is an incredibly active page. So if you're just looking for camaraderie or answers, there's plenty of people in there who might be able to help. And they're just like you. They're listeners of the podcast. Juicebox Podcast, Type 1 Diabetes. There's also a public page called Bold with Insulin, and I'm on Instagram at Juicebox Podcast. Today, the podcast is sponsored by Omnipod, makers of the Omnipod Dash and the Omnipod Promise, which I will tell you about a little later. But let's just say this, you may be eligible for a free 30-day trial of the Omnipod Dash. Find out at omnipod.com/juicebox. The show is also brought to you today by the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor, and that you'll learn more about and get started with at dexcom.com/juicebox. I don't know which one of my URLs is the favorite to say, but I do like the way Dexcom.com, ooh, my voice just cracked there. We'll do it again. Dexcom.com/ I like the way it bounces back and forth. Dexcom.com/ I think it's the com thing, and I'm overly simplistic. So, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with omnipod.com/juicebox. I'm just saying Dexcom.com. Anyway, here we go. Melanie.
I'm Melanie. I live in Utah, but I was born and raised in Virginia. I have a husband and a son that are type 1.
All right, you didn't say your last name, which you don't need to, but I'm just going to say that whenever I see your name pop up on my schedule, it feels like you were named by like Stan Lee or a Marvel writer or something like that.
Well, I mean, I married into the name. So my maiden name is Jones, which is really easy and plain. But yes, and when I started dating my husband and he said his last name was Melantine, I was like, oh, this is not going to be great.
You're like,
you could marry this guy.
You could easily be Spider-Man's girlfriend with a name like that. That's all I'm saying.
I'll take it.
But do you like that boy that's the Spider-Man now?
No, I like Joey Maguire, like the original one.
Oh, Tobey Maguire?
Tobey Maguire.
All the way back. Oh, don't worry.
Yeah.
Get you showing your age. Anybody under 20 just now was like, oh, she's so wrong about that.
I know. Oh, and all of my children. I am so wrong about that too. But yeah.
I stood in a line with Arden a couple of years ago for hours so she could meet the kid who's Spider-Man right now. And
which I wish I could say his name, but I can't remember.
Off the top of my head, it's slipping for me off the top of my head. But I'm going to just tell you that the countless thousands of girls that were there for that, it was in a giant auditorium and the line just snaked around forever. And it was like you were next. You went in, got next to him, threw your best pose on. He was like, thank you. And you were like shoved right out the back of the thing.
Yeah.
It was fascinating. And she was still like overwhelmed at all the things she thought she said and didn't say. And I was like, the whole thing took 8 seconds. Like, what are you talking about? Anyway, at one point during this conversation, his name will pop into my head.
Yeah, or maybe mine. My kids are going to be super disappointed in me.
That you couldn't think of it off the back. I can picture him. I know he's British.
Uh-huh.
That's where I'm stuck. It'll come to me. Anyway, so you don't have type 1. Is it just a 3-person family? Is it you, your child and your husband, or are there more kids?
There's a bunch more.
Oh, okay.
Kids. So.
Did you come to me through the secret underground railroad that I have in Utah?
Yeah, I must have.
Yeah. The show is so incredibly popular in Utah, and I don't understand why sometimes. But okay, so well, I guess let's start here. How long ago did you get married?
I've been married 27 years.
Okay. 27 years. And when was your husband diagnosed?
2019. So just barely. He was diagnosed when he was 48.
All right. So you guys were married like 25 years before he was diagnosed.
Yeah, which
Gotcha.
I'm not sure you've interviewed a wife yet who, was married so long and then had their husband.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I assume that after 25 years, you feel like you're on the back nine already. Like you just sort of feel like your kids are going to get a little older and you'll retire and things like that'll happen.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of teenagers at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we still have a lot of they just keep coming. So I have 7 children,
right.
So a lot. So, so we had a lot. We were in we still are. The hard part, I would say, of raising kids and being married. Mm-hmm. And then, he had all of the classic diabetes symptoms, but nowhere ran in anyone. I mean, it runs in my family, huge. I have an uncle who has it, and I had a cousin who had it. And then it's on my dad's side too. So, but that was never really on our radar. And then the typical story, he was diagnosed with type 2 wrongly, 4 or 5 years ago, and then changed his diet, started exercising, lost weight. And then when he went back to the doctor, they were like, you're done with diabetes. Like, you're good, you're healthy. And then he went to a random appointment, why can't I think of the name of
a GP, your general practitioner, right?
Yeah, just a checkup. My oldest son wanted to go, and so he was like, well, let's make an appointment, we'll go together. And he went, and he was concerned enough about the fact that he'd been pre-diabetic before, mm-hmm. and type 2 or whatever, that he went in fasting and said, I want a glucose number. And they ran it, and they called him and said, so did you eat a box of donuts on the way here? And he said, no, I actually came in fasting because I wanted an accurate number. And they were like, this can't be right. Why don't you come in again and make sure you're fasting? And when he went in again, I think he was over 500, and they called him and said, how sick are you? Are you so sick right now? Do you need to go to the ER? Right. And he was like, what are you talking about? I feel great. Wow. I feel fine. I feel like I do every day.
So it seems like, first of all, I have to say I would not be a good doctor because I found myself thinking I would have just asked if his pancreas was tired because you have 7 kids. But seriously, just in general, I'd be like, oh, maybe you're just tired. But if he came in type 2 4 or 5 years ago, did he have weight to lose?
So I would say then he did maybe a little have a little bit of, and he wasn't super fit. He wasn't really exercising a lot. And he had just changed jobs, and his stress level was off the charts at that time too. So there were lots of things going on with him when that happened. And so this was a different doctor that he saw the second time though. Maybe the first doctor would have put it together, but there was never even a follow-up. And it was probably at least 3 years between those two, when he'd seen a doctor last and then saw this doctor.
When you say he changed jobs, did you mean he I'm sorry. I feel like his job is having sex with you and then watching you have a baby. But no,
I'm trying to think how old our youngest was then. But yeah, no, he changed his job that brings home the
so
money.
there's a lot going on in his life, and this happens. He diets down a little bit, and then the doctor's like, hey, your blood sugar was high. I said to you, you should lose weight. You lost weight. This is over now. But he was probably just honeymooning on and off, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And he went mostly keto, which wasn't called that then, but whatever.
I think they called that low carb back then.
Yeah, right. Just meat.
Right.
Atkins probably was more.
Low carb for people who don't like broccoli is how I always thought of it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So probably because he changed his diet and he was honeymooning, it all just kind of
blurred together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he felt okay.
Yes. He took metformin for probably 6 months. Mm-hmm. He has an iron stomach. He can eat anything. So where metformin normally makes people really sick and not feel well, he was fine on it. And I'm sure that helped too, I guess. I mean, I don't know. There's differing opinions on that, right? On whether metformin will actually help anyone with type 1.
Well, I know, what I do know is that metformin is used off-label for weight loss by some doctors.
Oh, yeah,
so
for sure.
There's that, I guess, value there if he was looking to lose weight. Okay, so after that happens, after he's kind of given a clean bill of health from his type 2 diabetes, how long does it take for him to realize he's not okay?
He really didn't see a doctor again for probably 3 years. And to be 100% honest, he didn't go because he didn't feel good. He went because my son wanted to go. And he was like, well, I can get him in if I go.
Yeah, he was
so he just went.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was just there, so he did it.
So, yeah. And that's funny because I would say that I said to him before he went, you're going to be diabetic again. And he thought I was crazy. And I said, you're drinking a ton, not alcohol, but always drinking liquid. Like he would sit at a dinner and drink an entire 2-liter bottle.
Oh, jeez. Because he was and he didn't notice that as odd?
No, he just thinks that's social for him. And he is a big drinker in general. Like he drinks a lot of liquid in a day.
Gotcha.
More than most people.
But you saw it.
Yeah, it was an extreme that I thought. And now looking back, I can see all of the type 1 symptoms, but I didn't know then that that's why he was acting the way that he was acting. Okay. So if that makes sense.
It does, but I want to know how he was acting.
Okay.
So.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's important. It's an important story, actually. And we do need to talk about how the doctor almost killed him when he was diagnosed. But it was hard. Marriage was hard right then, like for probably really for 2 years. But I can even pin it back to when he was diagnosed with type 2 and then kind of back and forth. And we had older kids and teenagers that were doing things that were stressful and hard. So marriage was hard then anyway. Yeah. But some of those classic symptoms of just not being able to remember and your brain being foggy and you just not really being all the way there. I mean, they really do say when your blood sugar's high or when your blood sugar's low, that it's like you're drunk, like your brain doesn't work
the same way as it should.
The same way, right? Yeah. That it's
we are altered. Well, I mean, have you ever heard me say that I think that one of the very important reasons that you should work on keeping your blood sugar in a stable lower range is because you get to then be who you're supposed to be. You know, you don't recognize that that's why I shared with people how out of whack I was when my iron was really low, because I was difficult to be around. Like I was very short tempered, and things that just don't make a person upset would make me upset. The tiniest thing, and I was just like 100 miles an hour in one direction, like it was the most important thing in the world, and we had to get it fixed, and or whatever it was, or it was unbalanced, and you could come off like an asshole, like you really could. Like for somebody just from the outside, they could just look at you and go, "Oh, interesting. Melanie's husband sort of turned into a jerk," and then that's and you don't recognize it because it's happening to you. It happens to you in the beginning slowly enough that you don't see it. It's not like breaking a bone. You can't just go, wow, my arm hurts now. Something must be wrong. It just happens so slowly, But
yeah. And I would say, I mean, I think he had his jerk moments. But I would say more it was that he was foggy all the time. So he couldn't remember that there was an appointment, or he couldn't remember what he was supposed to do that day to help me with the kids, or he couldn't. And I would have to remind him over and over and over again about things. And he would get so mad at me, like when he would keep asking and I would keep answering. I'm like, why do I have to tell him so many times? And he just thought it was normal. Like, well, I work full time and we have all these kids and I just can't remember. But I was like, we've been married a long time and you could remember before now. I felt like I could count on you before now. And right now I feel like I can't count on you, which when you have that many kids and are going through all that, you need to feel that way. Yeah. Right. Hey,
I don't believe this is germane to the story, but just because it keeps coming up in my head. What are the age ranges of your children? Like, what's your youngest and oldest right now?
So right now, my youngest is 9 and my oldest will be 22 in June. So he's 21.
That's not even that big of a gap. Yeah.
They're all 2 years apart, except I have a set of twins that are number 2 and 3. And then the last 2 are 4 years apart. So
the 9, 10, 11, there's 9, 13, some twins in the middle, the older ones. I gotcha. All right. I think I didn't count 2 of them when I was just doing that, but wow, that's cool. And you're okay? Like your uterus didn't fall out or anything like that? Everything's fine on your end?
Everything is fine on my end. I'm very healthy.
I also want people listening to know that I didn't say on your end as a pun. It just came out that way. So, sorry. Okay. So he's like that, blah, blah, blah. You notice it, but you notice it as behavior.
Yeah, I definitely didn't connect it.
Right. There's no reason you would.
Right.
Yeah. But now you're saying hindsight, knowing more about type 1 diabetes, it's all completely obvious.
Yeah. Well, and how much he changed after diagnosis and then getting his blood sugar in a reasonable range.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So not foggy anymore, able to keep up.
Yeah. Like more reasonable, like more like my partner, like he was before.
So now if he doesn't do something that you expect him to do, you can just yell at him.
Well, I do often question his blood sugar.
So you find yourself in the same position as a parent does, where I know I have said to Arden in the past, we're going to test your blood sugar, and if it's not low or high, you're in trouble.
A little bit. There's a little bit of that. Yeah. Like, are you acting like this because your blood sugar's funny, or
just not?
Are you really mad, or are you really?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because I can tell you from my own personal experiences that after something like this happens to you, and then it's found out and understood, the next time you actually are legitimately upset or tired, then people look at you like, oh, is this the thing again? Or, you know, or is he just tired? Or like, there's sometimes like, I'll like raise my voice. And I'm like, I want everyone to know I'm fine. This is just angering me. But it brings everything into question for a while. So he's diagnosed for certain 2019.
It was July of 2019.
Okay.
Yes. But so they diagnosed him type 2, but they looked at him and said, you don't look like a type 2, because this time he lost weight.
Okay.
So he did the typical, he lost probably 15 pounds before he went in, but he had started working out. So he attributed it to this.
He's doing great. Yeah.
Yeah. Lifting weights that he was doing. And I was like, that was a really fast weight loss.
No one gets into shape in 7 days.
Well, men do have an easier time, I will say. But I was like, that is really fast for you.
Even too fast for that. Okay. So 2019, he goes back to the doctor with a problem. They hit him with the type 2 again.
But they looked at him and said, we really probably don't think you're type 2. Let's do the test to see if you're type 1.
So they say it just like it's a knee-jerk reaction, but at least they followed through with the antibody testing.
Yeah, they did. And he went to an endocrinologist, but in the meantime, they prescribed Lantus for him, a long-acting.
Okay.
And they sent him, So they prescribed it, but she said to him, I usually have a sample pen needle here, but I don't have one today. So basically it's like a pen and you put a needle on the end and you grab your stomach. And I mean, really, honestly, that was the most he was taught how to give himself a shot.
Wow.
Was this random. And then she prescribed 40 units of long-acting insulin for him to give to himself at night before he went to bed.
40 units. Hold on a second.
Yeah. 40.
Does he weigh like 250 pounds?
No.
No?
I'm pretty sure he didn't even weigh 200 pounds at the time. And so I think he ordered a meter. I mean, it was all very like,
scattershot.
I'm supposed to do this, but we didn't really, I mean, the most I really knew about diabetes was that my uncle had it, that no one ever gets it when they're that old. So he kept saying, I think I must be type 1. They're testing me for it. And I kept rolling my eyes and saying, you're not type 1. No one gets diagnosed with type 1 this late in life. Like, that doesn't make sense. And I mean, now I can look back and go, yeah, with that number, of course you were. Anyway,
who would know? I mean, unless you have my job, like I believe right? I've interviewed someone at every age range, probably up to like 64.
Yeah.
That have been diagnosed with type 1. So
it's crazy now.
It just, it's not what it's not thought of the same anymore, but it really does. Marketing works, I guess, calling it juvenile diabetes for so long has it etched into the minds of a number of generations. Like it's going to take more generations for people to grow up with like, oh, I remember that. Like my mom was diagnosed at 48 and then no one will think of it that way anymore, but it'll take a lot of time. So, So he went home and gave himself 40 units before he went to bed?
Well, so he was kind of slow about the whole thing because I think his test results hadn't come back yet to say for sure he was type 1. Mm-hmm. And so he kind of thought, well, I can just change my diet and it will fix it.
Yeah.
But he was testing his blood sugar and it wasn't fixing it. And so he went and picked up the prescription, brought it home. It had probably been a week, maybe, since she prescribed it. And of course, he's taking metformin and all the things that they prescribe for type 2s. And he's standing in the bathroom about ready to give himself the shot. And I'm like, Kate, I don't understand insulin at all. What if, I mean, and you just have these vague understandings, right? So I'm like, I think you can pass out and have a seizure. Like, what if something happens? And he was like, well, you can just give me juice. And I'm like, we don't have juice. And how do I know when and how much? And I have a sister who's a nurse and my best friend is a surgical PA. And I said to him, we can call one or the other of those women and ask them, one, whether 40 units seems right, because the pen only holds 200 or something. And I was like, that is a lot of that pen to be giving yourself at one time.
That's an interesting feeling. Like, would this pen only last 5 days? Like that, is that how that works?
And you've never taken insulin ever in your life. And that's the amount that you're supposed to take. Like all those things just seemed.
So I want to pick this apart for a second. So just for context, is your husband the kind of guy that would jump off a zip line, go bungee jumping, or try heroin for fun? Is he any? Probably
not the heroin, but he's been skydiving. Yes. Okay. He's been bungee jumping. He's done all. Yes.
So there's no mechanism in his brain to go, don't do this. Somebody said it, so it'll work. Like, when you get to the rainforest and the zip line's going through, I'm a person who looks at that and goes, well, I'm not getting on that because I don't know anything about the people who put this up, or what if I fall here? And like, I don't do that. I go, no, thank you. Or I watch 1,000 people do it first. And then I go, okay, now I'll try it. So he had that vibe. You were women listening are just like, see, men would just be dead without us. And, and so you were smart enough to kind of pick through the details of it. But I think what's most important is that I don't believe this is an incredibly uncommon story.
No, I don't think it is either. I don't.
And now knowing as much as you know about type 1 diabetes, it is a fascinating statement that someone was like, here's this thing. vaguely this is how it works. Let me just rando pick a number out of the air. Go give this out to yourself before you go to bed. So if something happens while you're sleeping, you can just drift off. And
well, I definitely would have woken up to a dead husband. I don't think there's any way I wouldn't have. 40 units, he takes 13.
I was going to say, that was my question. How much does he actually need? Because
and 13 now. So when he started, he really probably needed about 9.
Yeah,
10.
who even knows, right? Like, it just, you would think that there would have been some sort of, I can't believe that anybody used a mathematical equation to come up with 40 for him at that weight. Like, I honestly think, and this is random, and please, I'm not a doctor, and this is not a mathematical equation, but I would think if you were going to say 40, like if it occurred to me to tell an adult to use 40 units of Lantus the first time, I would have to think that their blood sugars were in the, I don't know, 800s, and they weighed in excess of 250 pounds maybe. And that's just like random thinking about it. Like, I would think if he's a guy around 180, 200, I think maybe we'll land around 1.5 units an hour. Like if he's on a pump. So I'd be around 24 to 30, and I'd still probably end up saying, why don't we try 15 to start? Like in this specific scenario, it doesn't make any sense.
But that's an endo, right? So this is just a general practitioner who probably knows very little about any of it, right? Really?
who just opened a drawer and was like, look what I have. It's a Lantus pen.
Right. I mean, I'm in nursing school, and I will tell you, they just taught us how to mix NPH and regular insulin. Right. And I was like, no one does this anymore. This isn't even a thing. But so they just teach you not enough. Right. So she didn't know enough. I don't know if she Googled like someone who has an average blood sugar of 500, how much long acting insulin would they? I have no idea.
And I have to tell you, even if he was, say he was really elevated, say his blood sugar was super high, the 40 might not have got him the first day, but once his blood sugar came down, the next day it was going to be a huge mistake. Like, you know what I mean? Like maybe the basal would have, I mean, obviously if you use way too much basal insulin, it'll drop your blood sugar. So maybe it would have, but I don't know. And you don't even have a meter really. Like there's no context for any of it.
No,
that's interesting.
It was, yeah. So, I think we called my sister who's a nurse, and she was like, yeah, that seems like a lot. I mean, she works in an emergency department, so she doesn't know a ton, but she was like, that does seem like a lot. And so I think we decided to do 10.
Okay.
We're like, let's just do a fourth of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we did 10, and I want to say that it worked okay. I think he's built up to 13, and I think there's been times that he's been under 10.
Yeah, I would imagine.
But he's MDI still. And he actually only takes long acting. He doesn't bolus for males. Yeah.
Does he not need to, or does he not do it? Because your face is telling me he should and he doesn't. But you got 7 kids and you need to get them all through college. So you're just gonna like, what is it you're saying?
Well, okay. So I mean, we could. You're married.
Yeah.
So you can't really tell them what you think they. Well, you can kind of tell them what you think maybe they should do, but they get to do whatever they want to do. And his blood sugar is good. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
It's good. He mostly eats meat.
So he's on a lower carb. So he's decided to do it this way.
Well, I think he read some things that said that you can slow it down if you don't tax it, the pancreas.
So he's trying to hold on to his honeymoon a little bit.
Yeah, which I think mostly is working. But it is going. Like we're watching it slowly go, and he has a Libre,
mm-hmm.
so he is aware of his blood sugar. But Libres you have to scan. They don't just. It's not a constant feed.
Right.
So, but he does scan all the time, like all day. He knows where he's at. Overnight is different, but which is hard. It's stressful for me as a wife because I have a son who has a Dexcom, so I get his alarms.
I think it's interesting, like that. If I had your husband on this show to tell this exact same story, he'd be like,
oh, yeah,
they thought I had type 2, and then I went on a diet, and then it was type 1, and now I use MDI. It would probably be the whole story, right? Like, it takes an outside.
Actually, he really likes to drag those stories out.
Oh, he would have chat.
Oh yeah.
Well, yeah, but he might have told a story nobody cared about. Like so. Like,
oh, for sure.
There would have been a lot of details where you're like, I don't understand why it's important that it was at 12:30 and it was cloudy outside. But no, I think it takes. I mean, honestly, like, you know, I'm not going to denigrate. I'm obviously a male who's a caregiver, and I'm pretty good at it. But most guys are just like, it didn't kill me, it's good. Like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. That's the level of concern. I'm watching my son deal with something he's never dealt with before, and you explain the details to him, and then ask him an hour later, and he's like, I don't know, I wasn't listening. I was like, great.
Yeah.
It is really kind of super interesting. So he's managing MDI with a Libre. I have a lot of questions. How long after his diagnosis does your child, and which one of your kids is it? Let's do like this. Let's call the 22-year-old number 1 and the 9-year-old number 7. Which number kid has diabetes?
6.
Wow, look at how quickly you did that. So the 14-year-old, right?
He'll be 13.
13, excuse me. Okay, He's 13. All right. And he got it not long after your husband?
So 3 months.
That is not long after your husband.
No.
Was there like any moment where you were like, is this contagious?
Well, that's actually a funny story because then 3 other kids in our neighborhood were diagnosed within a year. So there was a lot of like, what?
People thought.
How?
Like, it's funny. When you sent that in your note, my thought was like from a reasonable macro perspective that there are a handful of people who live in your area who have the markers for type 1 diabetes who were likely to get it at some point in their life. And then maybe some sort of a virus or something went through the town and then it kicked it in for these people.
Yeah, that's my take too.
Yeah.
But I think some of the moms, of course, tried to really dig in and see if they could find a cause somewhere, which you do because this is grief, right?
Yeah.
And that's the first thing is figure out the why, try and find the why. And I think, I'm sure I did that too at the beginning, but at some point you're just like, it doesn't actually matter.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
We got to do this.
It's not 5G. So. And even if I could figure it out, it doesn't matter. And I can't move. That's the other thing I think too. Like I can't just move. Like imagine if there was something that was happening around your house. Once everyone knew and all the houses went up for sale, like, you know what I mean? Like, what would you really do? Like, you are kind of stuck a little bit where you live. Like, once you're an established family, it would be hard.
Yeah.
I mean, if you told me I had to bug out of here and I had to sell my house because I don't have the money to go buy another house without this house being sold, I don't know. It could probably take me years to leave here. Like, if you know what I mean? So, not that you would, just, and I do agree with the idea of you have to come up with, well, you don't have to, but it hits you so strongly that you want to know why it happened.
For sure.
And I don't know why. Like, what do you do with that information once you learn? You know, is it just to make yourself feel like you didn't do it?
Like it's not your fault?
Yeah. Like, I wonder about that sometimes too. Because I felt like that a little bit. There was a long time where I actually found myself wondering, were you always washing your hands before you were cooking for Arden? Like, and I do. And I'm sure there have been times that I haven't, but that's how ridiculous that thing happened to me. Like, I need to figure out what happened. I'm sure I did this to her. You know, like how did I do this? Because she was really little. So, you know.
Yeah, it is a little helpful that my husband was diagnosed before my son, because I for sure would have blamed me. And now, because I have so much of it on my side of the family. So I'm like, well, I mean, I guess it could still be from me for him, but I couldn't have given it to my husband. So
right. You're just like, there's enough doubt in here to make me feel better about this.
Right.
I watch it happen to my wife because there's so much different autoimmune stuff on my wife's side of the family. I know she feels badly, like somehow it's her fault, which is ridiculous too. You know,
you can't prevent it.
Yeah. And even at that, I'm just going to come out and say it. That was a weird place for an ad break. I just couldn't find the right spot. And I was like, I'm just going to have to pick a place. I pride myself usually on doing a better job. All right, I'll just do a great job on the ads then and make up for it. Ready? omnipod.com/juicebox. You go there and you find out if you're eligible for a free 30-day trial of the Omnipod Dash. This is a free use of an insulin pump for 30 days. What am I saying here? Am I saying something crazy? Maybe, but it's real. Go find out if you're eligible. Are you thinking to yourself, oh, I would, Scott, but I heard Omnipod's got some other stuff coming and I want to wait for that. Well, I hear that. I understand how you may feel, but understand this. Omnipod has the Omnipod Promise. Ooh, what is that, you want to know? Well, here's what it says. Super simple. The Omnipod Promise says this. If you're waiting for that next big thing, you don't have to, because with the Omnipod Promise, you can upgrade to Omnipod's latest technologies for no additional cost as soon as they're available to you and covered by insurance. Terms and conditions apply, but you can find out all the details at omnipod.com/juicebox. So if you're a person who's sitting there thinking, I'm going to wait a little longer, I want to see what the next thing is, you don't have to do that. omnipod.com/juicebox. Just go now. You're all covered. Speaking of covered, Australia, y'all just got covered with the Omnipod as well. omnipod.com/juiceboxAU to get started. That's for Australians. You guys got your own link. Pretty special. Speaking of special, look at me. I'm just boom, boom, boom. You can't stop me. I'm selling, baby. Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor. Why do you want it? Well, should be obvious by now, but in case it isn't, let me go over it with you. Rate and direction. That's right. How fast and in what direction? Rate and direction. Is my blood sugar rising? Is it falling? Is it rising 2 points per minute? 1 point per minute? More? Dexcom will tell you that. That's valuable information to have. It also gives you the number of your blood sugar. Actually, Arden's blood sugar right now is 160. She was out driving. She's a licensed driver now. And she started getting a little low, right? Her blood sugar started to drift down. So she got an alarm and she ate some fruit snacks. Then her and her friend stopped to get a little froyo. She didn't do a great job of bolusing because she didn't think to cover the fruit snacks. So she got a little rise right now. So as soon as we saw that rise going up, I texted her and I said, hey, what's going on? She said, I just had frozen yogurt. And I was like, oh, okay. Did you bolus for the fruit snacks for your low blood sugar? And she went, I didn't. I said, okay, we'll do that now. Put that insulin in, stop the rise. It leveled off and now it's coming back. You think you could have figured that out without the Dexcom G6? No, I don't think I could have. Nobody could have. I mean, what am I can I tell the future? I can't. But Dexcom can show you what's happening. Dexcom.com/juicebox. You want to know how I've kept my daughter's A1C in the 5s for like 7 years while she's eating froyo? Shouldn't be much of a surprise to you. It's Omnipod, it's Dexcom, it's accurate meters, it's the stuff you hear about on the podcast. Links in the show notes, links at juiceboxpodcast.com. Please support the sponsors. I sometimes look at my kids and I think, am I ever going to like pull them aside and tell them, hey, you know, if you have kids, there's going to be a higher likelihood that they have an autoimmune disease, right? Like, am I going to put that in their head or not? And like, it seems wrong to say it to them. And it seems like bad parenting not to say it to them. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Kids are pretty smart. I mean, I would assume they'll connect it at some point, but we kind of had to connect that because I did trial nap with all the rest of my kids. Because at that point, I'm like, oh, okay, there's 7 of you.
Yeah.
If we're doing statistics wise, at least one more of you will have it.
Right. I got to start selling off the furniture and saving money if all 7 of you are going to get this. What did you find out in TrialNet?
None of them have the markers.
No, just lucky 14. Or lucky number 6, excuse me.
His name is Marcus.
Well,
you can call him Marcus or number 6.
I was going to call this episode Lucky Number 6, but we'll see.
So I have to pick a teeny bone with you about that. So when you first made the show, you would threaten or say like, that's going to be the name. And then it was never the name, never. But lately, I'd say like 50% of the time, it's really the name.
Yeah. So what ends up happening is while I'm recording, it strikes me like, oh, that might be a good title for the episode. And then when I go back and edit, I find something that I like better. Or, and this is true, and I've said this already, if a great title comes up too early in the episode, I don't use it. Because I'm so afraid like at 15 minutes in, you'll be like, oh, that's why they named it this? I don't need to listen to the rest of it.
I've never wanted to stop listening. I will tell you that.
Thank you. I have very weird theories about how to make the podcast popular. So,
have you made it yet? Because I would say it's probably really popular. Yeah.
So yeah, it is. But if you can kind of separate these things, I'm a person who is incredibly interested in helping people with type 1 diabetes, like genuinely and sincerely. I'm also competitive. And with myself and with the classic interpretation of success. So I'm trying to do better for myself. I'm trying to be better than the masses. And I won't chase those things if it hurts helping people with diabetes. So I'm trying to find a way to help people with type 1 diabetes and have a massive podcast in the global sense and always feel like I'm doing better. So this month there was 150 times more downloads than there was the first month of the podcast. But then I see that number and it immediately feels like, well, why can't I just get to this number then? Like why can't I? So that that's how it works for me. And I treat this podcast very seriously. To me, it's a business and it's a public trust at the same time, like in my mind. So it's doing a lot of good for sure. It's an awesome thing. I appreciate it. For sure. It is. I'll be happy when everyone who has a cell phone in America, UK, Australia, New Zealand, and a couple of other places in Europe, all are listening to the podcast, whether they have diabetes or not. Like, I want people to be like, I don't have type 1, but I love that show. He's funny. Yeah. You're really good at it. I have a brother who runs a podcast and I'm always like, you should really, I know there's no one like you're not interested in diabetes, but you should listen because Scott's really good at this. I appreciate that. So. I like talking to people and moreover, I think that everyone has a great story. You just have to be willing to not judge them and listen for it. And not prejudge them. Like, it's fun to joke that you have 7 kids. I mean, because why not? Because I mean, how are you not going to? If you're a person who meets a person with 7 children and doesn't look at them and go, "Holy Christ, are you okay?" Like, I don't know what you're thinking. But it can't be the focus of the whole thing. You can't decide. Again, the reason the titles of the show are so kind of wonky is because not one of these episodes is about anything specific. Except the pro tips and the defining diabetes. They're specifically about them. And still sometimes we drift away a little bit to have a real conversation, not just feel like somebody's reading through bullet points that anyone could learn on the internet if they wanted to, So there's something about how you deliver it, I think. But that's a lot of high-minded talk about podcasting that nobody cared about. Okay, so... Okay, Marcus, I was going to say number 6, but I see where you're going with this. Either way. Is diagnosed... And now you're in charge instead of your husband's in charge. Super interesting. How did that go differently? Actually, it's really interesting. So he classic symptoms, lost a bunch of weight, peeing all the time, super sick. He plays football. So I'll be honest, I have a lot of kids. I don't weigh them and pay attention to their weight really, would be enough to notice you've lost a significant, but he had weigh-ins for football. And then 6 weeks later, he weighed himself in my bathroom and he's like, I've lost 15 pounds. And I'm like,
no, you're 12. Or actually he was 11 at the time. And he's like, no, Mom, I for sure did, because I had weigh-ins. So I really did weigh that much. And he had been sick and lethargic, but still playing football, still going to practice every day. So it's one of those where you're like, hey, you're tired, but you're doing this. And we're big eaters and big carb eaters. He had a huge plate of pancakes before a football game one day. And he went to the football game and he threw up the entire football game. He couldn't play really. Well, he'd play and then he'd come out and he'd throw up a bunch. And then I can do it. And I wasn't at the game. My husband was there and he was like, Marcus is really not doing well. He's sick. Yeah. And so thought he had the flu. He came home, slept the rest of the day. We got up the next day. He kind of felt like eating, which when your kids have the flu and then they feel like eating, you put carbs in them, like bread, juice. So he had bread and juice. And I think my mother-in-law sent home the apple juice container with us. And it was like a half a gallon apple juice container or something. And I think he drank the entire thing and got so sick that I finally just looked at my husband. I'm like, I'm taking him to the ER. I don't know, maybe. And he's had bowel issues in his life. And we've kind of tried to figure out allergy problems. For a minute, we thought he was lactose intolerant. We took him off dairy for a while. And he was kind of a random thrower-upper anyway. Like he would just randomly throw up. And so I was like, maybe, I don't know, maybe as a bowel obstruction. I called my friends who are medical people and they were like, appendicitis, maybe, I don't know. So I took him in. The weight loss was concerning to the nurse practitioner, I think, that was talking to us. Go ahead.
I was going to say to you, when you said 15 pounds, it's clear you have more experience raising children than I do, because I would have went in a private room, locked the door, and thought Marcus has cancer. Like seriously, that's how it would have hit me right away. I would have been like kids that age don't lose 15 pounds. We're in trouble. But you stayed pretty steady through it for a little bit, like looking for reasonable, because, yes, people get cancer as children, but it's fairly unlikely. So, but my brain would have jumped right to it. So
I will say the day before, when my husband brought him home and he slept the rest of the day, he slept in my bed and I was kind of with him in and out. And I will say I'm spiritual. I'm a spiritual person. I'm assuming you've assumed by now that I'm a Mormon.
You have to be. You have all the markers. If there was a trial net for being a Mormon, I already found your test. I know. Yes. I'm good. Don't worry. And that's what I meant in the beginning. The podcast is incredibly popular in the Mormon church. And I will
tell you my theory about that if you want.
That's at the end. We'll keep that for the end. Go ahead.
Okay. So I had a pretty strong impression, feeling, whatever you want to call it, that he was very, very sick. And for me, I did actually go to cancer. So that's interesting that you brought that up, because that kind of brought that memory back for me. But so when I took him, I had already made a doctor's appointment for him earlier in the week, but it wasn't until the next Monday. So this was Sunday and I was like, I can't wait until Monday. We need to go right now. And so I took him, weight loss, but they ordered like an ultrasound and all these things to look at his bowel. And I am told, actually the nurse practitioner told us that the minute the doctor on call walked in and saw lost weight, he said he has diabetes. And she was like, no. And she had asked me if there was diabetes in the family. And I said, yeah, his dad was just barely diagnosed. And so, but I'm not sure I said type 1. I probably just said he was just diagnosed, to which everyone's going to go, oh, well, his dad was diagnosed type 2 then, which doesn't matter for the kid, right? Yeah. Or whatever. But so they dipped his urine and it was 866.
Wow. That's
so, yeah.
No kidding. But then does he leave the hospital on MDI? How does he leave the hospital?
He did leave the hospital on MDI. We were in an ambulance within about 10 minutes from the hospital we were in up to a primary children's hospital.
Mm-hmm.
But my one funny thing is my husband, I called him and I'm like, he has type 1 diabetes. And he was like, okay, I'm on my way. And he came and he showed up and they're wheeling him out to wheel him into the ambulance. And he's like, well, where are you going? And I'm like, well, we're going to the children's hospital. And he said, well, now that we know he has type 1, we know what to do.
Yeah, let's just give him 40 units of Lantus.
And I'm like, they don't do that. You spend a couple days in the hospital and they educate you. And that is really where we got all the education for diabetes. And yeah.
What was that like for your husband? Was he sitting there thinking, oh, wow, there's a lot to this I didn't understand I should be concerned with? Or
yes. Yeah. And really had not been given any sort of real good. He knew high was bad.
Mm-hmm.
So he was mostly trying to keep his blood sugar between, I think, 60 and 80. So even after he was diagnosed, he was low all the time, didn't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
But he's like, well, they say that at first you don't feel good. But he didn't even really understand the ranges, like the healthy ranges, I think, at that point.
Wow.
And was living super low, which was also not
good for him either. Yeah.
No.
That's interesting, though, the way he thought about it was he probably was like, I'm dizzy under 60, and a person who doesn't have type 1 diabetes, blood sugar sits around 80 fasting. So that was his goal, was staying right there. Yeah, I'll tell you, I'm pretty good at this, and I don't think I could keep somebody's blood sugar between 60 and 80 without causing a lot of lows. Like that's,
Oh, I think he had a lot of lows.
Yeah. That's something else. But if he's thinking 80's top line, then 120 must have seemed like crazy to him, I would imagine.
Yeah. I think it was fairly easy for him to stay pretty stable low at that point. I think he was still honeymooning really strong.
Mm-hmm.
And just on the long acting and probably taking maybe a little too much long acting. Because there are times when he eats to feed the insulin. We talk about it on occasion.
Yeah. Don't feed the insulin. That's not a good plan either. So your son gets his education, which which really just begins to educate your husband and you, because, hold on a second. Why is someone calling me? A spam risk? Get out of here. I let the phone, if the phone knows it's a spam risk, why does it send me the call? I've never picked up.
I get them too. And my dad would really like to know that. He likes to complain about that. I mean,
just block it if it's a spam risk. Why does it make it to me? So the education's coming. Everyone's really being educated.
Yeah.
How long does it take for you to put a pump on your son?
So we had a CGM 30 days.
Okay.
They make you wait 30, and I think it was 30 days, and I think it was on his arm by 31. And then I started fighting for a pump maybe at 3 months. I was already listening to your podcast, so I knew I wanted one, and I knew what they did and what I wanted to do. And so I started fighting then. They're very particular, like they have their standard. It's 6 months. And I said, that's fine. It can be 6 months, but I'm putting a pump on my kid at 6 months. I'm not starting the stuff at 6 months. Yeah. So I think I took the class at 4, got approved, anyway. So the pump was delivered to our house the day my son turned 12. So he was diagnosed in October, and March 10th, I think it showed up at my house.
Okay. Wow.
So, but then of course, so this is like COVID, right? Like COVID starting within a week, maybe. So then, we can't train you because you can't come into the office and whatever. And I don't know, maybe the pump magically made it onto his arm without training. Maybe it didn't.
He tripped and fell and it stuck to him.
I'm not really sure. I don't know if when we were doing the training, we already had been using the pump for a little while. And, I don't know.
Mom, I don't know how I got pregnant.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm not sure what happened. We went to a movie, I swear.
There's a lot of YouTube videos on how to set up pumps and how to figure all that out. We have an Omnipod.
Yeah.
So that's what we do. We actually loop. So
do you? Okay. Well, I'll tell you it's interesting to see different people's perspectives on this. Like you'll see someone who's got some information and they're like, we can figure this out. And you'll see other people who don't have any information are like, oh my God, don't do anything that the doctor didn't tell you to do. It's so like, it's very, very, I don't want to just reuse the word interesting, but I'm fascinated by watching people's different reactions to ideas like that. Like, you went to, you got the pump, it's here in the house. It's a thing that delivers insulin, just like the needles are a thing that delivers insulin. Like there's really no.
Well, and it was like the most perfect time of any time to start a pump on a kid.
You were at home and still
all day.
Yeah.
I'm managing everything. And, we just kept saying like, what could go wrong?
Right.
And I couldn't find anything that could.
Yeah. Well, your common sense took over there. That's for sure. Have you been a nurse your whole time or no?
No. So I'm in nursing school right now.
Yeah. So it's not like you were a nurse and decided to shift to diabetes. Like you decided to be a nurse. Is it from the kids and the husband and everything?
So
you're just trying to get away from those kids.
I only have 4 left at home, which I'm sure for you probably feels like a lot. But for me, I'm like, it's 4.
It's not so bad. Yeah.
But I think I've always wanted to be a nurse. I wanted to be a labor and delivery nurse. Mm-hmm. And then and I was like, nope, I want to be a nurse. What I want to be is a certified diabetes educator, which now has a new name.
Yeah.
But I can't remember what it is. It's really long. Mm-hmm. And you have to either be an RN or what Jenny is.
Jenny's a lot of things. Jenny's got a I don't know.
Jenny's a master's in
I
nutrition.
Forget. It's funny. I say it a lot, but I read it every time I say it, just so you know. Like every time I introduce Jenny in an episode, I pull this thing up and I'm like, oh, that's what she is. Well, so how far into that are you?
I'm in my 9th week.
Wow. You just started.
So, yes. I'm in my first semester. I'm doing an accelerated program. So it's 20 months for my RN and then another year for my bachelor's.
Good for you.
And then to be a CDE, I want to say it's 10,000 hours working with diabetics before you can even test for the certification.
So you 10,000 hours in a clinic or in an endo setting or something like that.
Yeah, which is where I want to be anyway. So. And my understanding is I'll be doing the same thing. I just won't have the certification yet. Mm-hmm. And then I'll get it,
That's
hopefully.
Amazing. I got a note recently from another listener who said that they're switching their focus. They are a nurse and they're becoming a CDE. And she said it was because of the show. So one day, a couple of years from now, there will be an episode called I Made a CDE, in case you wonder, because I'm very excited that someone did that based on listening to the podcast. I think that's really cool. So you said you were listening to the show up front, which is how you knew to get the Dexcom and the Omnipod. How do you find it?
I actually was trying to remember and figure out how I found it. I think it must have been online. And I was Googling books, right? Books to read or whatever. And I think now I am a podcast listener though. So I probably searched it and found it that way.
Yeah. It's interesting that you don't even remember because it was probably such a throwaway thought. Do you know how many podcasts I found that I haven't listened to? Like I'm like, oh, I want to listen to that, and I never did. I would, if you said to me right now, how did you find that podcast? I would have no idea. But
yeah, I don't think anyone told me about it. I've told a ton of people about it who will say, well, I found out about it from Melanie, but I don't think. But I didn't really know anyone to talk to. If I'd been the second or the third or the fourth or the fifth person in my neighborhood, I might have found out from them,
right,
but I was the first. So, so I got to be the one that shares it. But
how closely does the podcast mimic what you heard in the hospital for your son, or does it not?
No, of course it doesn't. Okay. I mean, it doesn't. I'm actually writing I have to write a research paper for nursing school, and I'm writing about the fear of hypoglycemia that they instill in all of us, to the point that we do not shoot for healthy blood sugars, period. And what a problem that is, because I think it is. Yeah.
I hear you. Now, how much of what you figured out makes it to your husband or doesn't it? Like, are they two separate people with diabetes and they don't intersect, or is one kind of, like changing the other, or no? Like, what's the dynamic like?
I mean, obviously I manage my sons, like he's involved, but I manage it. So everything that I learn here, I use with him. And I sprinkle things in here or there, or there'll be a really good episode that I think would relate to him better. All the episodes are really good. Just one that he might really resonate with. And I'll say, hey, you should listen to this one. I mean, he's listened to the loop ones because he helped me set up the loop and he understands. I mean, he helps with the care as well, but I probably am really the primary diabetes caregiver for my son, which is, I think, a little bit interesting because he has it, but, actually, you've interviewed a couple other moms that are in a little bit. It works the same way.
Well, what are what's your husband's versus your son's A1Cs? Are they close to each other?
So I don't know. My son's is like 5.6. And I think the last time my husband went, it was in the 6s, but he hasn't seen anyone since before COVID.
Oh, I thought you were going to be like, I go, hey, guess what? We got his A1C back. It's 5.6. And he goes, and walks away from you and doesn't share his.
No. Oh. No, his is usually good.
Yeah. I was going to say, because this is not a race, but if it was, that would mean you're winning, just so you know.
Right.
Well, you're in a really interesting situation because you said something earlier about like, you're married, you can't tell people what to do. Like the best you can do is, I don't know how other people do it. I wait for a moment that seems like this is the moment that would least lead to some sort of a disagreement, and then I drop in what I think and run away, and hope that a couple of days later it resonated and stuck with somebody. And I'll tell you, I've been married a long time, not as long as you, but pretty close actually. I think I'm 25 years this summer, maybe. I guess I should find that out. But a pretty long time. And I just think one of the things I've learned is you don't get to tell other people how to think. And even when they're kids, it only works till they're maybe 12 or 13. And then they just pretend to listen to you for the last 6 or 7 years. And then they're like, they take your money for college and then they run away. That's it. Right?
Yeah.
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 So.
You were talking about raising adult children a little bit in an episode I was listening to recently. And I thought, yep. That's about what it is. Yeah. That they're not, their brains are not fully developed, but they think they are.
Yeah, they don't know it. It's like asking an unstable person, "Are you unstable?" They're gonna go, "No, of course not. I've got this all." Listen, the internet is full of people who think they're making sense. You can see it happen right in front of you, and it goes for anybody really. You just growing up is super interesting because I try to tell my kids. Right now, in this moment, you are as smart and as strong as you've ever been in your entire life. And it is completely impossible for you to believe that there's more for you to learn. And next year, you will look back on this person who you are now and go, oh, that guy was an idiot. But you're an idiot now, too. You just need to live another year to find out. So
that's a really good perspective. Yeah. It's a good way to look at it. Sure.
And there's no way to tell anybody that. And honestly, I don't know if you'd want someone to know that because then you'd strip away all their self-confidence. You do not want somebody standing around going, I'm dumb and I don't know what's going on. And in a year, I'll prove that, because then that's like, you know what I mean? Then that you're, I don't know. Do you ever meet somebody who's like, I don't know, like pretty, but doesn't think they are, or, or somebody who's been told that they need to lose weight, but they don't. They spend their whole life thinking, I have to do this thing. I have to do this thing. Before you know it, it's the end of your life and you just missed everything, So it brings up problems, and at the same time, it's the way things work. So you've got your son for a little while longer to put him in a frame of mind, and then you're just trying to keep the tiger from getting out of the cage before he leaves the house, I would think, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Managing a 13-year-old, 12, 13-year-old it is hard though. Like I got a little perspective when he was first diagnosed of what it's like before they're
Yeah.
Before their numbers are just crazy, and puberty and all that. It is unbelievable how unpredictable it is every day.
Yeah. And it's diabetes. And to be honest, because you have 1,000 kids, if it wasn't diabetes, everything's unpredictable and difficult too. Yeah. Cole and I stood at a baseball field 8 months ago where he was trying to figure out this little thing about his swing. And I was saying one thing and he was certain it wasn't that. And you might have thought we were fighting over global dominance. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it was just, it was the most intense conversation I've ever had in my life with a person over when his foot was landing. Like, that literally is what we were talking about. Like, is your foot coming down later than you think it is? They've had equal conversations at the UN about human rights. Like, it really... and you're standing there, and there is that person inside of you who's like, I have more like perspective, and so you can kind of like step back from it a little bit. But you're like, there's no way to infer this to them. And COVID's really taught me that too, because here's the thing about this year: COVID's terrible, and it appears to be killing specific people who get it. And I'm a big proponent of the idea that we need to vaccinate population and move forward and everything. And I think it's a 1,000,000% scary and real and all that stuff. None of that changes the fact that 2 years from now, you're going to be going like, remember COVID? You know what I mean? Yeah. And kids don't have that perspective. So they're stuck in this time where someone told them, stay inside or you're going to kill your grandmother. Stay inside or you're going to get sick. Do you want to grow a unicorn horn 3 years from now? Because that could happen. We don't know. And the ones who take it seriously it's overwhelming. Like, it's seriously overwhelming because when you're younger, you lack that piece in your brain that goes, all right, I'll do these things and this will be over at some point. Like, I'm watching younger people think this is the rest of life. Like, I'm going to live in my bedroom for the rest of time. And I'm like, that's not what's happening, you know?
Yeah. For sure. The perspective. Yes. I will say, I mean, my kids have been in school and out of school and in school and out of school. So in Utah, we went back in the fall. Mm-hmm. We don't go on Fridays, and there's a percentage of kids. If the certain percentage is reached, then they send all the kids home for 2 weeks, and they do online school for 2 weeks, and then they go back.
Right.
So that's how it started anyway in the fall. Now they actually test to stay is what they call it, where they test them. They test the whole school, all the faculty, everyone in one day. And anyone who's positive goes home. And then they can reset the number to 0 because they know that there are 0 people that have COVID in the school that day. And then they start collecting numbers again of kids who have it. And then the number goes up. But I can't remember. Oh, this is why I was saying it. So I think my older kids are mostly pretty adjusted. They're not super afraid of COVID. We know a lot of people who've had it. My daughter had it. Mm. But my 9-year-old, anytime he hears that someone has it, it's this like, oh no, or he's terrified. Right. And we have to sit down and say, okay, it's not terrifying. People, people that have had it, everyone is doing okay. Like we are lucky that I don't know anyone personally who's died from COVID, but I do think perspective wise, especially these little like elementary kids who go to school with masks all day. Yeah. They're going to have some PTSD a little from that. Fear.
It's a shame because I mean, first of all, it's obvious that everyone's life is equally important. Obvious. That's obvious. Right. But we stopped saying, overwhelmingly, here are the groups that it's impacting, because I guess that felt, I don't know, it seemed to feel wrong. Like, I remember the first time I heard someone say out loud, oh, it's okay because it's only affecting these groups. I was like, oh, that's not right. Like, don't say that. And so I think in a way to protect anyone from having those thoughts, because I also see how that could go wrong. You know what I mean? Like, I can also see how like a whole group of 20, 30, 40-year-olds would be like, hey, guess what? It's not going to hurt me. So, and then it hurts everybody. Like, I get the whole global versus personal perspectives. But yeah, I just think that in an unavoidable scenario, which this obviously is, some people just didn't have the tools to get through it. And it's not just kids. There's some adults who don't have the tools to get through it. Like, I mean, I told my son the other day, I'm like, here's one thing I know for certain. This is going to end. And could you get COVID still? You could, but you know, the same way I think about everything else. Like, I could die in a car accident, but I still drive my car, and I'm sure that there's a place I could live where the air would be cleaner. And there's some risk that comes with being alive, and you just mitigate the best you can, and you go live your life, you know. And if you are the 29-year-old guy who gets COVID and you know, and it kills you, that's really terrible. But it's just as bad as if you were. To me, it's not much worse than sitting in the house the whole life being scared. So, I mean, I don't know what kind of life that is either. You got to take a chance sometimes. And I think we're getting that. I think the vaccine's going to build up. It's funny, this will go out long after it happens, but my personal thought is it's March now. They're going to ship a ton of vaccine in the next 30 days. It's going to get delivered pretty quickly. I'm thinking spring is when you see things kind of begin to open back up again. And
I hope so.
Yeah, that seems to be the vibe to me, but we'll see.
My mom has the vaccine. So and my dad's doing the Johnson & Johnson trial. So he's had the one, but he doesn't know if it was real or not. But she is finally like, maybe we could get together as a family now. So
yeah, well, J&J's just got emergency approval the other day.
That's great.
Yeah, so your dad needs to call up that site and say, hey, do I have it or not?
Do I have it or not?
Yeah, and by the way, if I don't, I helped you out. Where's mine?
Yeah, for sure.
Which I'm not sure if that's how it works, but it should if it doesn't. All right, so couple last things, and I won't keep you too much longer. Okay. Your son's doing well. You're managing well. You listen to podcasts. You're probably aggressive and, you know, changing your settings and stuff like that. But I still want to know, like, what are the tools that led to? I mean, your son's got a great A1C. So what are the tools that led to that? What do you think is the most important thing about managing insulin?
Well, understanding how it works, and that's what you say, right? Yeah. Not being afraid of hypos, and we go back and forth here because his settings change so often. Just 2 weeks ago, he went really high one night after pizza, up in the 300s, which really hardly ever happens. And I mean, we fought and fought and fought to get that down and couldn't. And so the next day, it was still way higher than it normally is. And so I made a override called Double Down and literally put in 200% insulin. So he's getting 100% more basal all the time than he would need. And I'm thinking, there's no way but I don't know. And so I did it, and he needed that much insulin for 4 days. Wow. 200% what he had needed before.
That's through a pod change too, right? Like, so there's different pumps
we changed the pod at the beginning of it because I thought, well, maybe it's just that. But yeah, even through it was very strange. And he never got sick. Like maybe you're sick, and then it went down. And then maybe 2 days ago, he started riding really high again, and we did it again. And he has needed that much insulin for the last 2 days. Wow. Again.
Actually, I've recently been using that looping trick to like crush a high. I've started to notice like a sticky blood sugar in like the 160, 180 range. If you do an override and just double it for not long either. Like I found like a half an hour can cut like a quick 60 points out of it. There's a lot of different ways to manipulate insulin to get it to do what you want it to do in its spot.
So are you using, am I allowed to ask you about loop?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. You're using auto bolus.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Do you use it 100% of the time, or do you switch back and forth?
No, it's always on. And I guess technically we're not using loop anymore. We're using that other version of it, which is APS maybe.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So I think there's two, I don't know. I literally just let Kenny tell me what to do.
Right.
Yeah. I was like, which one of these?
We auto bolus, but usually if his numbers are really good when he's going to bed, I'll swap it over to auto basal for the night.
Okay.
While he's sleeping. It tends to keep him just a little more steady.
All right.
Auto bolus, because it's a little more aggressive, he'll kind of pop up and down a little. The range will be a little bit bigger.
Yeah, I don't know if that's settings or not. Arden's like super stable overnight. So,
Yeah.
Like last night, there was like we had pizza. I made homemade pizza. So I made pizza, and earlier in the day, she had something else with a lot of carbs in it. And then she had a compression low. So we're sitting around at the end of the night. I've got her blood sugar at 90 after pizza. And I was like, I win. And then like it's starting to go down. And she's like, oh, I'm getting low. She goes, don't worry. I'd be happy to get an ice cream cone. And she starts walking through the house. And I'm like, I think this is a compression low. I don't really think you're low. And she goes, too late. I was like, okay. So I got a little behind the ice cream cone because there was no pre-bolus, which caught us up into like that 165 range. And I had to push it back down. It took me a couple of hours to overcome not pre-bolusing the ice cream.
Okay. So that was one of my friends that I mentor, talk to, whatever about it. She's like, hey, I need an accurate picture here. So when you say a couple hours to fight that because you missed the pre-bolus, what do her numbers look like in that range?
Yeah. So I'm going to think, I think it's about 3 hours in total.
Okay.
And it went from 90. I stayed ahead of it for a little while. Then the food overwhelmed not having a pre-bolus. So she was up in the 175 range. That came back to 165. I looked at it for a second, realized this isn't going to work, did an override, and then brought it back down again. Like that's what happened in that like 3 or 4 hour period.
And it took a 3-4 hour period. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of how it worked over here, but I always wonder, like, is it faster for him or, you just wonder.
No.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I did it the way I did it because it was bedtime. If it was in the middle of the day, I might have opened the loop and like crushed her and then caught it again. But so time of day had something to do with why I did what I did too. Because I wanted to go to sleep.
Yeah. I don't open loop often, but I have started to think recently, like you need to use that tool a little bit more.
Yeah. During the day, I would have done it like that because I was trying to go to sleep. Like what I wanted to be sure of was that her blood sugar was going to go down and that I was going to go to sleep. Those were the two things that I was worried about. And I can pull it up and look to see.
Oh, no. That's good.
Why not? We're sitting here. Come on. So she came down. The fall took a little longer than I thought, to be perfectly honest. So the process that I went through took 3 or 4 hours. It still took another hour or so for her to come down. All the way. And then overnight she was, 106-ish. And then this morning decided she wanted hot cocoa, which is
it's always fun.
Crushes her. And she likes it to be extra chocolatey. So it's a packet and a half of hot cocoa in like this much water. And then she's like, it gets too hot. So then she dumps milk into it. So it's milk, a packet and a half of hot cocoa. And she's running around like in between classes. Like, I need this now. So there's not nearly enough pre-bolus. So the cocoa took her to 150. But we used enough in the bolus. So it didn't have to be recorrected. It took care of it on its own. She's 83 now. That's all happened over about the last 2 hours.
Yeah.
So.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I think she might have chased a couple of potato chips with that cocoa too.
Probably.
Arden's a very weird eater.
I fought a cinnamon roll last night for a few hours.
Yeah.
So
I feel like you're in an old 1980s Arnold Schwarzenegger movie trying to kill a dragon or something. I fought a cinnamon roll. See, that's a good title for your episode.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, here's my other question.
Go ahead.
I have one more.
Okay, because it's
an Omnipod question.
Mm-hmm.
So we have found, and I've read a bunch of stuff that when I give really a lot of insulin at once, then I get occlusions. So like we limit to 3, but I want it to be more than that. Do you limit it
3 units?
Yeah, like at a time.
I mean, Arden's bolus for the hot cocoa was 12, I think. And
you put it all in at once and occlusion problems.
Yeah. We don't see a lot of occlusions. Okay. So, I mean, you have to be careful because there's a lot of anecdotal information floating around in the world.
Yeah.
Like this happened to me, so this must be what happened. I try so hard to just say like, Somebody puts a pencil in their pocket and robs a bank. Some people see that and say pencils cause bank robbery. Like, it just is how people like minds work. They're like, it's so the place you see it more frequently than not is people who go from MDI to a pump don't use nearly enough basal insulin during the switch, mostly probably because the doctor dialed it back on them. Their blood sugar goes up, and the first thing they think is the pump doesn't work. Not that we didn't use enough insulin. It's fat. It's fat. It's just how people's minds work. So I'm not saying that it can't happen, that some people don't keep their boluses lower, but I've seen people say that, and then I've seen people not say it. It's the interesting thing about being around one space in the internet for so many years. What you learn to realize is that there's no ebbs and flows. It's just, it happens to somebody says it out loud, that question gets taken seriously online, and then all of a sudden there's 100 people who believe that that's some sort of a rule. Like, do you ever see people who get online and say, hey, is anyone else's Dexcom server down?
Oh, all the time.
And I'm like, that's not what this is. Like, you just, something happened on your end, but it's amazing that the thought is like, well, I don't have a signal. The rest of the world must not have one either.
Yeah. Well, it did happen that one time.
Yes.
And it just happened to be, I think, like 2 weeks after we started the Dexcom. And so we were completely confused and lost and did the whole delete off your phone and then had it be gone for longer. And
the point is that prior to that one thing happening, no one in the history of Dexcom ever asked that question out loud online. And now it's constant. The minute they lose their signal for a second, they're like, the server's down. I'm like, it happened. Dexcom has got to have been a company for a decade now. It happened one time. And they're like, this is the rule. This is what happens. I'm like, oh, they just happened to be online that day and have been really impacted by it. So now it's one of the things they think of first. You told me you have a theory on why I might be big in the
why
church.
there's so many Mormons that listen.
Go ahead. What is it?
Well, my theory is, and it's probably not right, but so do you have the Nextdoor app? Do you have that? Have you ever heard of that?
I have no idea what that is.
So people have an app. It's called Nextdoor, and it like connects you with the people that live in your neighborhood. Okay. And they'll write things like, what's that really loud noise? Or my truck got broken into last night. Everybody watch your cars or whatever like that. It connects people with the neighborhood. It gives them a forum to spread information.
Okay.
So as a Mormon, we have small congregations, not like, I mean, I grew up in Virginia. Almost all my friends were Catholic. I would go to mass with them, and they didn't know the other people at mass, right? It was just people that come to mass at the same time. We go with a specific group of people to church every Sunday.
Okay.
It's different with COVID. But so we have like a built-in community, and anywhere you live in the world. So in Virginia, I had one. In Utah, there's a gajillion of them, and they're really a small area. Where I lived in Virginia was a bigger area to have enough Mormons in that area to make up what we call a ward or a congregation. So we have access to disseminating information because we have close-knit groups of people. And then those groups then have a bigger subgroup that all meet together twice a year or whatever. So in that way, we just have, so I knew immediately when these 4 women in my neighborhood had diagnoses because I know them intimately because they are in my congregation.
Gotcha.
Then they know people in other congregations who also have it and then disseminate that information. So we have a little bit, we have a community, a built-in community, a little bit more than maybe other people have.
I see. Okay.
That's my theory.
All right. I'm good with that. I just like, I
don't know if
the first time I was like, that's cool. The third time I was like, huh. The 10th time I thought, what is happening? There's a moment when it is, and I said recently, I'm sure that there's been as many, Baptists on the show as, Mormons, except there's no way to, like, when a Baptist tells you that how many kids they have, you can't go, oh yeah, what'd you say? Did you say 7? And like, so there's no no lead into the idea. It's, so now I've just become like comically or comedically focused on the idea that I wonder when this all ends, what the number will be that I get to eventually one day.
I tried to Google like are there more diabetics in Utah? All of those things for you to see
There's
if I can figure it out better. And there isn't.
It's just communication. Some person said recently too that I was talking to, that the community is just generally focused on helping other people too.
Yeah.
So she said to me, your podcast clearly does that. So it kind of follows the vibe, and which is hilarious. Not hilarious, but it's interesting because I'm not religious or even particularly spiritual. But it's interesting how being nice to people and caring about them, it must be so uncommon that it feels very like spiritual. I don't know. Like to me, it just seems obvious, like to help other people. That seems very obvious to me. I did something on Friday night that took up my Friday evening, and I helped a small group of maybe 120 people online, and I felt like invigorated by it. Like it felt good to me. I don't know. Yeah. So everybody, if you want to feel better, like do something nice for somebody else. Don't ask anything in return. Don't give a crap if they're the same political leaning as you or anything like that. Like just go do something nice for somebody. There are sometimes people come into like the private Facebook group and I'll see them, like you can kind of see their life on Facebook in a split second. And I think, oh my God, if this person like we couldn't possibly be any more different. You know what I mean? And then they get in there and wrapped around diabetes. It doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. So, all right. Well, thank you.
For sure.
I appreciate that. Did we miss anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't bring up?
I don't think so.
They're all right? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right. I want to wish you luck with your nursing program. It's very cool that it's accelerated. I'm assuming, I just imagining like hungry people all over your house because you're busy now.
Well, I mean, like I said, I only have 4 left, and 2 are in high school, and then 1 in middle school, and 1 in elementary.
They can feed themselves.
Mostly they can feed themselves.
My son told me very famously in my house when I wrote a book about being a stay-at-home dad that ironically I had never been a worse father than I was the year I was writing a book about being a stay-at-home dad. He said, you just ignored us. And I was like, it's hard to write a book. It wasn't easy. Making a podcast is much easier. Anyway, thank you very much. Can you hold on 1 second for me?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm just going to hit. First, of course, a huge thank you to Double M's. What's up, Melanie? Thanks for coming on the show. I'd also like to thank Omnipod, makers of the Omnipod Dash and the Omnipod Promise, and remind you that you may be eligible for a free 30-day trial of the Omnipod Dash right now. Head over to omnipod.com/juicebox. I also would like to thank the Dexcom G6 continuous glucose monitor for all the things that it does for my daughter, and for sponsoring this episode of the Juicebox Podcast. Dexcom.com/juicebox. Support the sponsors, support the show, and support your health. Thank you so much for listening. I'll be back soon with another episode of the Juicebox Podcast.